Beautiful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I love our campus. I love this university. I love Mary, who is extraordinary, and I really love teaching. It's where my heart is. I am first and foremost a teacher, as all of us are first and foremost teachers. And today's talk is really about cultivating empathic connectivity. Empathy, as you know, is different from sympathy. Sympathy is feeling often sorry for, which tends to be sometimes condescending and often not so helpful. Empathy, by contrast, is not so much feeling for as it is feeling into, placing ourselves in our students' shoes. In order to do that, we've got to be very mindful of our intentions before stepping into the classroom, and be very mindful of the power of our every word, every gesture, every action in and also out of the classroom over the course of the whole of our interactions with our students. Henry Adams got it right when he wrote that teachers affect eternity. We never know where our influence stops. When I was an undergraduate, I studied a lot of philosophy, and the words of Goethe, the German philosopher, bless you, resonated most significantly with me. And I didn't know at the time that those words would become almost a prophecy of sorts. They would foretell much of my philosophy as a teacher. Goethe wrote, "I have come to the very frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. My daily mood makes the weather. With each word, with each gesture, with each glance, I can either hurt or heal. I can either add pardon or commit injury." And he closed with something so powerful that I actually had it etched in stone. It's actually on my desktop. If we treat people as they are, we tend to make them worse. If we treat people as they could be, we help them to become all that. As teachers, our students, we know, rise or fall to our level of expectation for them. I am constantly committed to the task not only of being better as a teacher, but also reminding myself of the struggles that come when I'm a student. And I take on different challenges. I take classes, I take continuing legal education classes, I take advanced graduate study courses, and then I decided last year that I was going to take up something really new and really scary for me, hot yoga. I decided that this would be important because as a bunch of lawyers and academics, we tend to be all about this. Everything is up here. And I was noticing I was becoming increasingly inflexible, both literally and also kind of metaphorically. So I thought, I'm going to expand. I'm going to open up. I had never done anything like this, and I really have never cultivated an athletic prowess. So I took a hot yoga class in my hometown of Cedar Grove. I walked in kind of reluctantly. I wasn't really exactly dressed appropriately, I learned, and I decided I would be in the corner, which was great, all the way in the back. And then I watched the warm-up portion before the teacher entered the room, and it quickly became plain to me that most of the people in this class were either veterans of Cirque du Soleil or the American Ballet Theater. I never saw such a thing. Elbows and ankles going over heads. It was very daunting. So immediately I started to shrink. Now I'm in the practice, and the teacher arrived, and she's guiding us in different poses. And she said, "We'll begin gently." So gentlemen, we were doing these various warrior poses. So she had us in a basic, not for me, basic warrior two. So I'm in my warrior two, others are in theirs, and the teacher is giving shout outs of praise. "Sophia, your warrior two is impeccable. Jason, you are poetry in a pose." And then she walks to the back of the room, she's watching, and then she gets to me, and she gives me the once over, and says to me, no judgment. No judgment. And she kept walking. Oh, no judgment. That's every judgment. And I started to shrink. I collapsed in the pose. And I went to a couple more of those classes, and I wasn't getting any better, and I was actually freezing up. Why? I was falling to her diminished level of expectation for me. I realized, as an educator, you got to switch classes. I got out of that class, and I started instead a Saturday morning class with a teacher named Amanda. Again, I'm in the back of the room. Again, we're assuming the beginning postures. I'm in my warrior two. Amanda somehow had the wherewithal to make certain that she knew every new student's name before entering that classroom. I was one of the new students. I had never been in her class before. She got into that classroom, again, shouted at her praise to various virtuoso of the form, and then she got to me, and she referred to me by name, made eye contact, and said, "Paula, that is spectacular. Look at your opening." As she spoke those words of favor over me, I expanded. I felt myself literally and viscerally exhaling. I got this. And I became better and better. Nowhere near the level of acuity that most in the room still enjoy, but I got better. I rose to my beloved teacher's vision for what I could be. She wasn't meeting me where I was, but she was giving me the benefit of every doubt. And I expanded in the presence of her generous gaze. That's the idea. That's the idea. And that's what I pray for before I walk into my classroom each and every time. Dear God, allow me to see what needs to be seen. Help me, as the Talmud says, to be that gentle whisper behind each blade of grass, each student, softly saying, grow, grow, grow. You got this. Grow. That's it. That's it. That, to me, is teaching empathically. Let me share with you a little bit of what I've come to know about the art and the science. I think you must be familiar with David Foster Wallace, one of his perhaps best-known commencement addresses. It became a very short book, This is Water, and he began the talk with the old joke. Two young fish are swimming. They happen to meet an older fish who nods at them and says, "Good morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish travel on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and asks, "What's water? What's water?" When we teach, this is water. This is water. To truly see what needs to be seen, that we have got an amalgam of students and their voices. People are tuning me out, might think one, because they think I'm not smart. Another, I love this stuff, I've got this. Another, I'm not fitting in. Another, I'm drinking too much, I'm starting to worry. Another, my mom just had a stroke. And these are all, by the way, actual vignettes taken from the lives and consciousness of my law students. Should I raise my hand? I'm not smart enough to get in this game. This happened so sadly only recently. My brother took his life 1 year ago today. That student was thinking. Let's advance. Why is it not advancing?
Oh, let's see.
Oh,
There
yes,
we go. Okay.
thank you.
I just need to threaten it.
Here's the big idea. Without empathy, we tend to be teaching content instead of students. The whole idea of empathic teaching, which you already do, all of us already do. We wouldn't be teachers were it not for the empathic capacity. We're committed to seeing our students for who they are and where they are as we guide them to what they are becoming. Empathic teaching is helping to engage us with the whole class. especially those at the margins, especially those who may feel left behind. It's a collaborative venture. It requires a real interest in learning more about our students' stories. How do they learn best? Empathy is a gateway. So much of the literature from the sciences tells us that empathic acuities linked to our mirror neurons enable us to allow our students to make learning stick. The mirror neurons. The neural mechanism at work was discovered in the 1990s by a team of Italian scientists. It contemplates a construct of intelligence deeply affected by as-if learning. In other words, learning by imitation. Observing another in an experience allows the observer to actually develop a facility, a rubric for processing the experience as if it was the observer's own. In the classroom, we're making use of the mirror neuron pathways to learning whenever we cultivate the human connection. Eye contact, gestures, postural signaling. That's why I truly believe that laptops are more a curse than a blessing in most classrooms. They are a visual barrier to connectivity, and they also offer a veritable world of opportunity for distraction, not just for the laptop user, but all those in her midst who can't help but look on as she shops at J. Crew or checks out the movie times for the weekend. Mirror neurons enhance what neuroscientists call immediacy, the ability, very human, to access conversancy with the subject matter. We access immediacy typically by face-to-face contact. It's why I worry so much as the parent of 2 young adults about virtual worlds, about social media, about the epidemic of facelessness and the lack of capacity that our children and their children may no doubt inherit, that is anchored less in the human connection and more in the click of a mouse pad. We embody the concepts we teach when we teach empathically. So much of the teaching methodology is rooted in the power of story. Us telling our stories, our students telling theirs. In law school, we tell the cases as stories in my classroom. The students are challenged to do the same. We engage in lots of simulation and lots of role-playing, reenactments. The case simulations get to the emotionality of the adversarial process, and they ultimately help in answering for real the question I put to my students before every case is read: what did this plaintiff want? What did this plaintiff want? And the student initially answers, well, professor, the student wanted money damages for breach of contract. When we finish with role-playing and a very dynamic exchange that involves the empathic emotionality of the experience, the answer to the question, what did this plaintiff really want, changes. It may have been as simple as an apology. We invite practitioners to come in and talk about how they did something relevant to the doctrine that is being studied. We show documentaries, movies, news excerpts. Empathic teaching is values-driven. I believe it endeavors to yield an inclusive perception, a more inclusive perception of my neighbor not as the other, but my neighbor as me. It helps our students to reconsider the other, however that other has been preconceived, and to reframe some of the us-them archetypes that tend to be the basis for so much acrimony in our world today. It It's essential to embracing difference. I tell my students, you may not have an experience of homelessness, and it is my wish and prayer that you never do. But I want you to come with me to the Bronx Homeless Intake Center to cultivate a proximity to those who are without a home. Our mirror neurons allow for all that is so wonderfully benevolent and altruistic and human within us to feel for, to feel as if, on the basis of the proximity of our emotional and intellectual connections. There's no pain on earth that does not crave a benevolent witness. It's incumbent upon us to stir the pot of consciousness and think about how our students might become benevolent witnesses to the suffering of others, to the stories of others. I tell my classes, the burdens of your own oppression do not relieve you of the responsibility to see others in theirs, to recognize others in theirs. That doesn't diminish the extent of any of your own struggles and triumphs. It enhances those. I have 4 questions that I ask, and I've done this for a couple of decades now, at the start of every semester and at the start of every class. Before I walk in to my classes, I have a ritual. The first question I ask, and I've got it down to about a 60-second science, what am I leading with as I enter the classroom? I know that I am a thermostat. As soon as I walk in, as all of us can, we can take the temperature of the room. Yes, it might be high anxiety right before exams. It might be restlessness right before the spring break. It might be abject fatigue right after an arduous writing assignment was submitted. I need to take the temperature of the class, but that's not enough. I need to be thermometer and thermostat. I'm going to be the one who's going to have to raise the room on the basis of the energy that I bring to the task. Before class, I scan the room, and I let my students in. I deconstruct with them a lot of my pedagogical techniques, because otherwise I look like a weirdo. I'm in front of the room and I'm very carefully looking. I'm looking at each and every student, and I am seeing as much as I can see on the basis of the nonverbal cues that my students are constantly giving. I tell them at the start of the semester what I do and why I do that. What do I endeavor to lead with? Several essential thoughts. First, I am really excited about today's class. Even though on some days I have to fake it until I make it, I am really excited. Shakespeare got it right. Assume a virtue if you have it not, soon it becomes yours. I act as a really excited teacher of the material would act. I cultivate a certain posture. If you haven't yet read Amy Cuddy's beautiful book called Presence, read it over the break. It is so good. She's a sociologist at Harvard. She did a spectacular TED Talk on body language and signaling, and Amy Cuddy talks about various poses, power-based poses, exhilarating poses that we can assume. And one of the most energizing poses is this. It's no accident, it was Rocky Balboa's. This. I do that before I enter the classroom. I stand outside the door, and before I open the door, it's this. And as a woman of faith, it's also sending the praise and the glory, if there is to be such, where it belongs. It's a yes, it's a shout up to the heavens. It's a thank you to God. What else do I lead with? I'm a lawyer, so I lead with, I love the law. I'm not going to be engaging in trash talk about my profession. I love the law. What am I leading with? I admire this class. I respect this class, no matter the occasional disappointments. I will see each student before me. I'm going to be alert to what they're saying and what they are doing. I'm going to learn from this class. And finally, I have a secret. I learned this from John Noffinger, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign strategist for her first bid for the US Senate. Noffinger studied Ronald Reagan, one of the most acutely effective politicians. And it's no accident he was an actor. Ronald Reagan, John Noffinger told us, would enter every room consciously thinking two thoughts. Number one, I am really excited about the future. Great things are coming. And number two, I have a secret. It didn't matter that he didn't have a secret, and it didn't matter that specifically there was nothing in particular that he was really excited about for the future, but he would cultivate the as-if persona. If you ever look at any of the footage, and I have, you'll see President Reagan, whether standing before Congress or before a Boy Scout troop presenting him with an award, with that same countenance. There's a certain look that comes over our faces when we're thinking not just that I'm happy. If we're thinking I'm happy, we're happy and we look happy. I'm happy. But if we're thinking I'm really happy and I have a secret, we become somewhat more alluring and mysterious in our countenance. I'm really happy and I have a secret becomes something like because now the primitive, the more lizard brain of an audience begins thinking, this person is intriguing. This person has something to tell me, to teach me, to engage me. This person will give me reason for hope. Because at bottom, we are hardwired to be hope seekers. Just before class begins, I think about several things, the fleeting nature of every day. I lost my dad in the blink of an eye when I was still a very, very young woman. And I cultivate a certain mindfulness and appreciation that I have this minute, I have this minute. I can't take for granted that I'll have the next. It's this minute. I stay on message. Every class ultimately is about incorporating the ethical referent, and that includes the power of resilience, of humility, of grace. The classroom is a safe space. It's not going to be a place for games of one-upmanship. It's not going to be a place where students leave feeling bad about themselves. It's not going to be a place where I will indulge the petty or the mean-spirited. Right before I enter the room, I do have a ritual, and I tell my students about that because through the glass window, they'll see me mouthing the words. I say, thank you, and I say, use me. And those are my two quickest prayers. The use me is shorthand for a prayer I've taught my children. Dear God, use me. I have spent so many years in school. Any words that you need spoken today, here I am. Any deeds that you need done in your name today, here I am. Use me. Make me your instrument. Cultivating connection. Face-to-face contact is always the gateway to accessing empathic acuities. Students without laptops, and so many studies that were recently conducted in Princeton and at USC, perform better on tests. Here's something so interesting. Students who handwrite rather than type, i.e. transcribe their notes, do better on tests. Why? Because handwriting notes allows for the act of ordering and of filtering. Our students are not studying for the purpose of becoming scribes, or in the law, court reporters or stenographers. The filtering mechanism begins to work when, in fact, pen is put to paper. The second of the 4 questions, I put myself in my students' shoes as I'm preparing for each class. With the eyes of a beginner, what would it take to make this material accessible to me? How can I present it to accommodate the various ways that my students tell me they learn best. How do I know how my students learn best? I ask them. At this point in the semester, I have index cards that tell me what each student's response to the question, how do you learn best, is. When do I ask them? We have large section classes at the law school. I have 60 plus in each of my classes. I break the class down into groups of 12, and we have a Friday morning breakfast club. And at the breakfast club, I ask each 2 questions. First, what do you love? What do you really love? And number 2, tell me how you learn best. Often, and initially this surprised me, most students have a ready answer. They know. On occasion, when a student is not so sure, I'll ask her to think about it. Think about it. Take as long as it takes, and then to let me know. I also listen to the words my students use. Our students give us cues. I'll have a student who'll say, I see that, and then I'll listen. She'll say, I see that. More often than not, that's giving me a hint. She really does seem to be a visual learner. I have another student in the second row who always says, Professor, I hear what you're saying, but I'm wondering, or what really is shouting out at me from the case is, that's going to be more of an auditory sense of perception. I don't know how this works, Professor. And this is the student who's often fidgeting at his or her seat, the student who's more kinesthetic. I see his or her leg moving or foot tapping. My son is a kinesthetic learner. He's in his first year at Fordham Law. I so wanted him at Seton Hall Law, but I love him too much to have him ever feel that he's in my shadow. It would be too hard. We're a small school. He's at Fordham Law, and still today, when he does the drills, he always played baseball all through. He went to oratory prep and then to Boston College. Still today, when he's reviewing and studying, he's got a baseball in his hand and he's throwing it up against a wall. He is a kinesthetic learner. He's tactile. He's got to move. He seeks ways to feel the material as he is engaging with it. I follow up in and out of class, and then I commit to the coincidental planned encounter. I ask the registrar to give me each student's schedule, and if I've noticed something in class. I had a young man last year, Patrick, and I noticed 2 classes in a row. He seemed very deflated. They were back-to-back on a Tuesday and Wednesday. And I wouldn't ask him after class, and I did not want to put him on the spot, but I coincidentally bumped into him. Meaning, I saw his schedule, knew where he'd be for the next 30 minutes, and I was in that hallway, and we bumped into each other. And I said, Patrick, how are you? And he said, Professor, I'm okay. And I said, are you really? Is everything okay? And he said, may I talk with you maybe upstairs in your office? I said, sure. We went upstairs, he sat with me, and this young man said, Professor, I haven't said this to anyone, but last year, and it's exactly 1 year as an anniversary yesterday, last year my brother Tommy died when he was 17. He had a very rare form of leukemia, and he succumbed, and he was everything to me and to my parents, and I just feel him all the time, and I don't know how I'm going to get through this week. That changed everything. It allowed me to see what needed to be seen, and we talked some more. And if he thought it appropriate, there was a counseling opportunity available. We have an on-site counselor, a brilliant psychotherapist who's from our campus right here in South Orange. And then as the semester progressed, I asked him to think about ways for our class to celebrate the life and legacy of his little brother. And he, in April, before the semester ended, said, Professor, I want to take you up on that idea. Do you think the class would get behind maybe making a modest gift, $1 a student, to a foundation that we're setting up in my brother's name? And I said, of course the class will. Patrick came up and he told the whole class his story, and immediately you could feel the shift in the room. why the empathic connectivity was being fostered. A year later now, I have students who commit to the 5K run that's done in that boy's name. I have students who forge newfound respect-based alliances and friendships with Patrick. And I have a young man who, while always carrying the sorrow in his heart, was able to muster some joy on the 2nd anniversary of his brother's passing. Reaching the whole class, I have recently begun the practice of positioning upper class students as pedagogical consultants. Here's what I mean. I've appointed an array of students. I have a team now of 5 students, and they help me particularly with developing the more culturally sensitive, more resident pedagogical modes. I have my students constantly, past and present, come in with the intention of giving me feedback. I want them to tell me at the end of class what they're seeing. Are there constituencies in the class that I'm not reaching? Are there any implicit biases that I'm revealing, even unbeknownst to me, in my choice of who I'm calling on or who I am not calling on? I'm particularly mindful of the imperative here with respect to students of color, with respect to students who may feel or through life experience might have found themselves at the margins. I have a student of color in my 3rd year class, and in the 1st year she came to me and told me that, and she was active in my property class. She told me that in another one of her classes, whose subject matter she particularly loved, the professor never called on her. And she's the only woman of color in the class, and that itself is problematic for all law schools. We are trying so hard to achieve and cultivate the promise of diversity. She said that she was never called on, and she has noticed it. And she said, Professor, I don't know what's going on, because the professor sees me. I see he sees me. He looks right at me as he asks the question, and then he moves on to another student. And I said, well, what do you think is going on? She said, I think that when he sees me, I look nervous to him. And I look nervous to him because I'm thinking he thinks I don't know the answer. But I do know the answer. But he thinks I don't know the answer. So what is that? That's Claude Steele. That's stereotype threat, yes? She's thinking he thinks I don't know the answer. She then said, and I think when he sees me getting nervous, I must contract a little bit. He's a compassionate teacher. I think he thinks he's being compassionate then. He is compassionate, and he will call on someone else rather than put me on the spot. And she said, you see the dilemma. The professor might be succumbing to his own implicit bias or his own attempt to be generous. The student is succumbing to her own stereotype threat, and the student is never called on. She asked me what to do. I said, go talk to that professor. He's a person of great heart and mind. Tell him what you just said to me, and then see what happens. She did. And exponentially, things improved. It's very hard to address what we may not know about. My own biases, and again, I'm still thinking, do I really do this? I had my daughter Nina, who's a freshman at Columbia University. She came to the law school a few weeks ago simply to observe a day. She had heard so much about my 1st year class, and she was excited to meet them. And she said to me that night, she said, Mom, I noticed you had 2 really hard questions that you asked, and I prefaced these by telling the class these are the legal ninja questions, super hard. She said in both times you cold called the whole class. Both times you called on a male student. She said, think about that. Was that just a coincidence, or are you doing that more often than not when it's a really tough question? And I said, gee, Nina, I don't think I'm doing that. But I'm so thankful to her for raising the question, because I'm very mindful now, particularly since our women students, while most often in the game, will be more reticent. They're more inclined to preface their participation with clauses like, I'm not sure if this is relevant, or I don't know if we really, if you may have asked this already, or I'm sorry, but. So, I'm endeavoring now to be even more observational about my range of choices, particularly when they're being made so quickly in the course of the moment that I may not have paused to actually reflect on what I was doing and how I was doing it. The third question, I always, by the end, and I'll do this on Friday of this week, I want to find out what have my students actually learned. I'm very committed to formative assessment. As you know, there are two basic assessment models. One is summative. That's the final exam, and we gauge how much our students have learned, and we gauge and grade performance. Formative assessment, I think, really is more helpful. It is the incremental opportunity to evaluate and gauge learning outcomes. What happened this week? I want to ascertain what my students actually took away this week in order to be corrective. I build regular assessment into every class experience. How? Every Friday we engage in low stakes or no stakes quizzing. It's a 10-minute pop quiz. Students are given a series of questions, they have 10 minutes to respond, and then we go over the answers. I collect the papers. I haven't assessed a stake of any great import to these pop quizzes, but I've noticed it doesn't really matter. It gives me a tremendous basis for knowing what has gotten in and what remains to be recrafted. Building regular assessment is important. Making It Stick is a great book. If you haven't read it, terrific book. Another great book, How We Learn, by Ben Carey. Ben Carey is the science writer for the New York Times. They assimilate so much of the science in such an accessible way. When grades are achieved because of cramming, most of the information is lost within a day or two after the cramming. By studying only once in finals mode, the brain never gets the message that this is important, that this needs to be stored for long-term retrieval. Frequent quizzing, no matter that it's for no stakes, communicates to the brain that message. Distributed learning is helpful as well. The reason that frequent evaluative measures work is the same reason why exercising for 10 minutes a day is better than being a weekend warrior and doing 70 or 90 minutes on a weekend day. To distribute the learning, I do row calls. Every Thursday and Friday towards the end of the week, one row is on. The row will not know ahead of time which one is. That row is drilled in rapid succession. I do a wrap-up. It's the Friday wrap-up. The last 10 minutes, tell me what you heard today. That appeals to the auditory. Tell me what you saw today. Tell me what you figured out today. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you didn't learn and need to review this weekend so I can review and think about how to open Monday's class. And finally, I ask myself, why should my students care about any of this? It matters. How do I show them that it matters? In the law, there are many, many ways to show materiality and to show relevance, most often by linking the material to the larger aims of social justice. Why should they care? Here, and I will spare you some of this, the traditional pedagogical method is very linear. We're shifting now, thankfully, to a more integrative, intuitive, holistic response. Why should we care? What do we do with our understanding of this material? What are the consequences? How does the material relate to the greater world that our students find themselves in? What are the subtextual judgments that our students are perceiving in the class and in the assigned material? How do we do it? We use empathy most effectively through story. It's content enriched by emotion. When we listen to a story, our brain's language centers sync up with the storytellers. It's as if we're experiencing the story. It's the reason why when we watch a movie, we could be moved to tears. It's the reason why when we watch a game show, we find our hearts filled with quiet joy as the contestant wins. I was watching the last 4 minutes of Wheel of Fortune, and the contestant solved the puzzle against all odds, and I was so happy. And I thought to myself, Paula, why are you so happy? You do not know these people. And I thought, it's the neural coupling model. My brain has synchronized with the brain of the problem solver. Researchers have found that storytelling triggers a set of neural processes. The listener turns the story into her own idea. It's when a friend tells you a joke that she thinks is so funny, and you're the one who told it to her a couple of weeks earlier. It's why metaphors work as well as they do. Storytelling can come in many forms, from experience, from movies, documentaries, TV clips. By putting the cases into a larger contemporary context, the multidisciplinary referent is so helpful. I teach housing. I use a multi-visual approach, a multi-sensory approach, to try to communicate how it feels to be excluded from housing. I show the larger historical and sociocultural settings. We watch clips, actually, from The Godfather, the immigrant experience of New York in the early 1900s. My grandparents were a part of that experience. My parents were then descendants of that experience. My grandmother worked in a sweatshop. We add interdisciplinary readings. It's not just the textbook or the casebook. Hand to mouth when we talk about poverty law. Linda Torado's heartbreaking account of life in bootstrap America. Racecraft, Dr. Field's perception of race as a social invention and what that means. That racism is the parent of race and not the other way around. Making it stick with role-playing, assuming a role, assuming a persona. I found this most effective and easiest to do in the classroom. Empathic listening, I'll designate a student to be the fly on the wall. I'll say, Logan, I want you to pretend that you're invisible. You're seeing everything in the room. And I'll have him reseat himself. He'll go all the way to the back. I want you to see everything. If you have to stand, you stand. And then I want you to tell me what you just heard. I want you to tell me what you're sensing from the class. That enhances certain empathic acuities and allows the student to become a teacher. Changing scenery. The brain likes variation. I block the class into 19-minute segments. That's the adult attention span, 19 minutes. It means I've lost you a long time ago. A 19-minute segment, TED Talks are 19 minutes. There's a reason for that. Every 19 minutes we change scenery. I may have the students stand for a certain portion to segue into the next 19-minute station. I've had students change rows at the end of a 19-minute segment. The beauty of a laptop-free zone is that they're not weighed down by their technological accoutrement to achieve that. The power of games. We play games a lot. Learning is supposed to be fun. We have prizes. We have joy in the classroom. Anxiety is an impediment to understanding. Fear is an impediment. So we would get competitive spirits going, but in the best of ways, whether Jeopardy or Family Feud. It helps to solve the puzzle of a given problem. It also builds teamwork. I create ways for my students to talk about the material more so that they're taking responsibility for content. I have you be the teacher exercises. For those I pre-assign. So I might say, Mary, you're going to be the professor for the next 3 cases on Monday, and I want you to come to the podium, and I want you to present as your own teacher. What do you need to communicate, and how will you elicit from the class what a good teacher would hope to elicit? That experience is always an epiphany to me. I've become a better teacher watching my students show me good teaching. I've also learned about myself because some students can't help but mimic me as they stand at the podium. And sometimes I think, oh dear God, is that what I'm like? And other times I think, wow, they internalize this, which I think this happens to be effective. I bring in guests all the time. Prospective students are great in that regard. I have the admissions office work with me. A prospective student comes in, Alyssa. Alyssa is an engineer. She doesn't have any background yet, but she wants to go to law school. There she is. And then I might say, Ashley, explain the easement to Alyssa. She's a layperson. She can't leave this room until she knows what an easement is. And all of a sudden, all of the lexicon about dominant tenements and appurtenant tenements goes out the window, and plain language carries the day, as it should when our students are lawyers for real. Contextual cues. I use props. I'll even use songs. The Madison Avenue advertisers got it right when they told us about the power of the jingle. You deserve a break today. 800-580-2300. Empire. We remember why. We have hard wiring to allow the rhyme, the jingle, the sing-songy, the catchy hook to stay implanted. Significantly, our students' demographic is particularly predisposed to accessing empathic pathways. Our students are the millennials. This group's capacity has been honed by a form of connectivity that views content as collaborative, as participatory. As digital natives, they're very, very good about treating real and imaginary worlds as the same. There's a certain malleability that their experience in game rooms has allowed them to cultivate. They're also socially conscious, and they're also inherent storytellers. Their posts, their Instagram shots, their statuses are constantly telling stories. They're sometimes described derisively. This is Generation Wuss, some would argue. It's a group that's very identity conscious. It sometimes takes a lesser form, a me-centric referent. Maybe, and I would include myself in this category, we were helicopter parents, maybe we coddled. Teaching with empathy, I think, is an antidote to some of those ills, because when you teach with empathy, you model empathy. So it's no longer about you. It's certainly no longer only about you. It's about the other. It's about how my saying this, my doing this, is making you feel. Emotional cues resonate with millennials. My students are always interested in the why. They're always interested in linking that to the how. Mutual respect, I found, is enhanced by fostering the acuitive and the empathic. To foster a sense of growing professional identity and community, our class takes up various projects. We cover something in property called the rule of capture. It rewards those who, for example, so ensnare or mortally maim a wild animal as to render its escape an impossibility. The rule of capture has led to the overcapture of so many species. The rule of capture has led to such nefarious practices as elephant poaching. We talk about the contemporary iterations of a rule of hoarding, a rule of capture run amok, and then we talk about the elephants, and then we adopt an elephant. The David Sheldrake Foundation runs an elephant sanctuary. It takes in baby elephants orphaned as a consequence of the elephant poaching throughout much of Africa. For a very small annual donation, it is possible to adopt an elephant. The class every year adopts an elephant. This year, the elephant is named Freddie, after a beloved colleague, Professor Wilfredo Caraballo, who is retiring at the end of this year. Last year, it was named Blackacre. We do starfish awards. You're all familiar with the beautiful parable of the little boy who's at the beach. He sees thousands of living starfish enjoying the sun. They're about to be left behind by the tide as it pulls out. As he's picking them up one at a time to cast them back, an elder comes by and says, "What are you doing? There'll still be so many left behind. It doesn't matter." And the boy replies, "But it matters to this one." It's the idea that every act of compassion matters and that we must never confuse the small with the insignificant. I encourage the class to look for the unsung hero in the class and in the larger law school community. I ask them to submit nominations for Starfish Awards. They can be anonymous, and most prefer anonymity. I receive beautiful nominations every day where students talk about the acts of valor, the acts of generosity, the acts of kindness, whether on the part of the security guard at the front desk or the classmate lending a helping hand. And each and every class we present those nominations, and on Amazon I pick up little starfish charms, exceedingly inexpensive, and I present them to the award winner. They matter, and I've noticed they matter because I've been doing this for several years now, and when our students as alumni come back, I see the charm, whether affixed to a keychain or a necklace or a bracelet. Here's the point. In and out of the classroom, how privileged we are. We can teach, but most essentially, we can show our students a view, in this context of the legal profession, but of the world at large, as honorable. Certainly, if justice is to be achieved, that valor is essential. The care that we take with each and every class, I am convinced, is an opportunity to demonstrate more than our love for our craft, our love for our students, our love for God, our love for the joys and the struggles of the learning process, and ultimately, if God does decide to come walking into the room, our teaching does become that love made visible. That's all I've got. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I don't want to keep you longer than I already have, but I would be so happy to talk with you more. I'm in no rush if you prefer to do it informally or perhaps formally, but I'm really hoping that this is the beginning of a collaboration, because our two campuses are a few miles apart, but often they feel like worlds apart. So I'd like to be here more, and I would love to see you at the law school, and I'm going to work on facilitating that. So thank you very much.
Does anybody have questions?
Would you be willing to share your PowerPoint?
Yes, of course. I'll give it to you, Mary.
I'll post it on the website.
I'll give it to you, and you'll post it. I'll do that
Fabulous.
tonight when I get back to school. Oh,
Okay.
I want to mention, tonight we have our Woman of Substance dinner at the Newark Club. It is so beautiful. It's really a celebration of the great strides that have been made to